This is Reason Revolution. I'm your host, Justin Clark. Thank you for joining us this week. We have a lot of news to cover, and I'm really looking forward to getting into the episode. But first, just want to let you know I'm a little under the weather this week. I'm recovering from a sore throat and a little bit of a cold, so I apologize if my voice doesn't sound just right for the listeners. But I wanted to make sure to get an episode out this week. I want to try to maintain the one episode a week schedule and towards the beginning of the week as well. We have less news stories this week because I have a much longer extended special comment towards the end that will eventually become a more long-form series of dialogue essays for the website Christianity Today. But until then, you'll hear the special comment. Without further ado, let's get into it. These are the short takes. This comes to us from the BBC. 35 people have died across Europe from measles, with 31 cases in Romania. A 6-year-old boy in Italy was the latest to die from the infection. More than 3,300 measles cases have been recorded in the country. This is from CBS News. A vast iceberg with twice the volume of Lake Erie broke off from the Larsen C ice shelf in Antarctica, scientists at the University of Swansea in Britain reported. The iceberg, which is likely to be named A68, is described as weighing 1.12 trillion U.S. tons. From NBC News, the island country of Malta has legalized same-sex marriage in a near-unanimous parliamentary vote, despite fierce opposition from the Catholic Church. It now joins over a dozen European countries that have legalized same-sex marriage. And finally, in entertainment news, this comes to us from Vox.com as well as the BBC. Jodie Whittaker has been cast as the 13th Doctor in the long-running BBC science fiction series Doctor Who, making her the first female to portray the leading role. And those are the short takes. Let's move on to the news items. Our first story tonight comes to us from the Underground Bunker, which is the official daily blog of Tony Ortega, who writes daily about the Church of Scientology. Now, for those of you who've probably listened to my previous podcasts or have listened to me on other things or have read some of my work, you'll know that I am a Scientology watcher. I find Scientology to be extremely fascinating as a subject. In some respects, I know more about Scientology than I do most mainstream religions. But Scientology as a religion, or as I like to call it more, a destructive cult, has gotten a lot of bad press as of recently, especially with the premiere of Leah Remini's show Scientology in the Aftermath on A&E. But today's article is a very interesting one because it involves Scientology and money. So here's the article from the Underground Bunker. How Humira, the world's best-selling drug, is helping to finance Scientology into the future. I'm going to be quoting the article now. The always reliable Jeffrey Augustine has scored another fascinating document for us that we are happy to share with you today. It's a tax document showing that the richest Scientologist donors in the world, Bob and Trish Duggan, recently found a way to make sure that millions more will be going to the church each year, and with no end in sight. That's the conclusion we've come to after looking at the tax document Jeffrey found and sent to us recently. It's a 2015 tax return for the Bob and Trish Duggan Foundation, and it has some eye-opening numbers. I'm going to continue quoting the article now. We've written numerous times about the Duggans and their amazing largesse to Scientology. Bob is currently worth about $2.8 billion, according to Forbes. His wealth zoomed in 2015 when he cashed in by selling Pharma, a company that has multiplied in value thanks to a successful cancer drug. Each fall, the Duggans are given a huge new trophy to celebrate how much they've donated to the church. This past year, we estimated that they've now given something like $80 million just to the International Association of Scientologists. Only one way that a church member can give money. Forbes claimed that Bob Duggan's total giving to the churches reached $360 million, but they didn't explain how they reached that figure. So, Bob Duggan founded a very successful company and sold it to a much larger pharmaceutical firm called AbbVie, which is the maker of Humira, the rheumatoid arthritis medication, which in 2014 became the world's most best-selling drug. AbbVie acquired Pharma from Duggan for $21 billion in 2015. So the article continues on and shows you how Bob and Trish Duggan, in a way to avoid tax rules and other things, they've set up a permanent foundation which holds shares of his stake in Abai's company, and the returns from those stocks will give the Church of Scientology roughly about $3 million every year into perpetuity, based on the return on investment. And all of this is going to be a tax deductible donation under tax law here in the United States. So why am I bringing this up? Why is this important? Well, it's important for a number of reasons. So for those of you who are not initiated into understanding the world of Scientology, I strongly suggest that you read Tony Ortega's blog. I strongly suggest you read Inside Scientology by Janet Reitman, Going Clear by Lawrence Wright, and check out Chris Shelton's YouTube page. He's a former Scientologist who goes into very great detail about what the church is, what its organizations are, and how it functions, both logistically and financially. He's a really great resource for understanding Scientology. But for those who don't know, and I'll try to give you a brief history here. When the Church of Scientology was founded in the early 1950s by founder L. Ron Hubbard, the main way that it gained its money was through Scientology services, so the practices of auditing, courses, books, tapes, lectures, ancillary materials. The church gained its money by giving people things, so it gave them materials. Hubbard was very adamant about making sure that if people were going to be putting money into the organization, that they got something back out of it. Now, this changed dramatically within the last 30 years, particularly after Hubbard's death in January of 1986. David Miscavige, who is now the current leader of the Church of Scientology, really reorganized the religion and logistically changed its focus monetarily. So you noticed in the article I mentioned something about the International Association of Scientologists. The IAS is the membership wing of Scientology. To be a public and paying Scientologist, you have to be a member of the IAS. Now that doesn't mean that you don't have to give up on giving money. So for example, the Duggins have given $80 million cumulatively to the International Association of Scientologists. That's just the membership wing. That has nothing to do with some of the other aspects of the organizational structure of the religion. So, and to give you another sort of background here, David Miscavige, who leads Scientology, his official position within the church is chairman of the board of the Religious Technology Center. That's his official title. Now that might sound like a bit of a gobbledygook to you if you've never learned about Scientology, but basically what that means is that he controls the religious tech. That's what Scientology calls its spiritual materials. You know, Hubbard's writings, books, lectures, and things like that. They call it the tech. And Miscavige controls the tech, and he who controls the tech controls the religion, essentially. And that's what is the case with Miscavige. Now, the shift that's happened in Scientology over the last 30 years is away from just accruing money by means of giving people services. They're now more or less accruing money through just pure donations. They're asking their members to continually give more and more money to the church because its numbers are dramatically dwindling. A lot of that has to do with the bad press that the church has received over the last 15, 20 years, particularly Lawrence Wright's book and Leah Remini's documentary, and a lot of very public and outspoken ex-Scientologists who've gone on the record about it. And so the Scientology is taking a beating in the public press, and for good reason. I mean, it's a horrible, destructive cult that rips people from their families with its practice of disconnection, which you can read about at Tony's blog. You can learn about a little bit about the practice here. Needless to say, Scientology is a very weird, destructive cult that gains a lot of money by essentially asking its members to give a lot of money. And a lot of members of Scientology are extremely wealthy. I mean, the Duggins are extremely, extremely wealthy. And so instead, what they do in Scientology is when you give them an incredible amount of money, they give you an award. So for example, they give you like Diamond Meritorious or Platinum Meritorious. For example, and the article points out to this, there's another high dollar donator named Jim Bridgeforth who received the Diamond Meritorious status. And there's a picture of him at the blog with the statue that he was given for his donations. And he earned that status by donating $5 million cumulatively over 20 years. So that's just $5 million over 20 years. The Duggins are going to be giving $3 million annually. That's insane. And the reason that this is important is because Scientology is very anti-big pharma. They're very much against the pharmaceutical industry. They're particularly against psychotropic medications and any form of psychology, whether psychological help or any kind of psychiatric therapy, whether it be medication or talk therapy or anything like that. Scientology is very much against that. They have something called the CCHR, which is the Citizens Commission of Human Rights, which is basically this like protest activist wing within Scientology that tries to slander and smear and talk horrible things about psychology and about medicine and about big pharma. As the article points out, this is something that I'm going back. This is what Tony Ortega says. It's pretty ironic for a church that openly hates the pharmaceutical industry and yet pushes for a drug-free world and yet accepts money from people like Abvi and accepts money from people like Duggan, who made his money through the pharmaceutical industry. The whole point of Scientology is that you're supposed to be like this immaterial, spiritual, immortal being who doesn't need to have medicine. That you can absolve yourself of any kind of psychotropic or just general medications. Hubbard used to sell Scientology as making the able more able. And so I think it's really ironic that one of the key benefactors of Scientology that are really keeping the organization alive are connected to an industry that Scientology openly and publicly hates. And it's not surprising. I mean, part of it is the fact that the membership base of Scientology is dying. Most people who are in the religion are second or third generation Scientologists. They were born into it. They don't know anything better, or they don't know any better, right? So they don't really know what it's like to not be a Scientologist or to be an atheist or be a different type of religion or whatever. They just don't have a clue. And so many of them don't really think about it that way. The estimates in terms of how many people are still in the church, I've heard low numbers of official dues paying members as being upwards of maybe 20,000. That's at the low end, 40,000 at the high end. It sort of had its peak in the early 90s when I think, maybe 300 to 500,000 people. Maybe not even that. It's probably closer to 100,000 people. The numbers are weird because Scientology is so opaque about what it wants. It's interesting. They want the whole world to become Scientologists or clear the planet, as they call it, but yet they're very opaque about the actual numbers they have. One point that Lawrence Wright makes in his book is that according to 2010 census data, there are more people who report as Rastafarian than report as Scientologists in the United States. So it's an organization that's dying, and one of the ways it's propping itself up is through money. And the Duggins are helping to do that. And apparently, Scientology hates Big Pharma but doesn't hate its money. Scientology is one of those things where we may see the end of it organizationally in my lifetime. Who knows? It would have died years and years ago had it not been for Miscavige taking over and being ruthless in his concentration of power and his aggressive approach to making Scientology popular or in many ways pervasive in the culture. And so we'll see what happens. But it's no surprise here that Scientology is sort of practicing one thing and preaching another. So let's move on to our next news story. This comes to us from USA Today. Creationism support is at a new low. The reason should give us hope. So I'm going to be quoting the article now. According to a Gallup poll conducted in May, the portion of the American public taking this position now stands at 38%, a new low in Gallup's periodic surveys. 57% accept the validity of the scientific consensus that human beings evolved from less advanced forms of life over millions of years. As the poll reveals, the biggest factor in the shift is a jump in the number of Christians who are reconciling faith and evolution. They are coming to see evolution as their God's way of creating life on Earth and continuing to shape it today. I'm going to be continuing the article now, quoting from the article now. Science doesn't have to drive people away from faith, says Deborah Harzma, president of an organization called BioLogos that promotes harmony between science and Christian faith. The reason I'm quoting this is that obviously a lot of you are listening to this have probably followed the story of the Ark Encounter, which is the giant sort of fake Ark or couple sides of an Ark in a really bad museum that's down in Kentucky that's run by Ken Ham, who runs the fundamentalist religious organization Answers in Genesis. So it teaches young earth creationism. So I think it's great in some respects that the American public are starting to shift on this. Now, the numbers of people who accept evolution the way science does, which is by no intervening things at all, is still fairly low. But it has really grown a whole lot. And it's sad that in the United States that, it is still this low. But I think it's a great sign that 57% accept the scientific consensus. I mean, that's not what the case was in just even 10 years ago. I mean, we've been fighting these battles since, Kitzmiller v. Dover, which was the big Supreme Court decision back in, 2006, that ruled out intelligent design teaching in public schools, which was a huge win for separation of church and state and for secular science-based education. But we're still fighting this battle. And it also sort of pairs with research done by Robert P. Jones and PRRI and sort of the end of white Christian America, which we've sort of talked about. We talked about on last week's episode. These trends are continuing, and they continue, I think, in many ways because people are starting to abandon fundamentalist religion. So here we go. I'm going to quote a couple places here, though. Not surprising, in view of our growing secularization, the percentage of Americans taking the strict evolution view, no divine rule, has grown significantly since the 1980s, from 9% to 19% in the latest Gallup survey. But the latest movement in public opinion shows one-time creationists taking refuge not in the no religion zone, but in the both-and position. The percentage of people choosing the hybrid view, around 30% in 2014, was 8 points higher in Gallup's poll. So this is a great step in the right direction. I think the country is becoming more and more secular all the time. And more importantly, I think that the consensus around evolution is starting to be accepted by the public. I mean, it's been accepted by science for decades. This is a political battle. It's not really a ideological one or a science-based one. It's a political battle. And it's ideological in the sense that it's sort of based on religion and sort of extreme ideologies. What I meant to say was that it's settled science. It's not settled politically. And so I think it's great that the country is shifting enough, and has shifted enough within I think even the last 10 to 15 years, that these numbers of that a majority of Americans are now accepting the scientific consensus on evolution. Even if they sort of put a caveat on it and say that there is sort of a God in the gaps version of evolution, that's still a step in the right direction compared to what we used to be at, where people thought the earth was 6,000 years old and that dinosaurs lived at the same time as people, which is what the Answers in Genesis people in the Creationist Museum down in Kentucky actually preaches to people, which is insane. But the number that I'm fascinated with is the number of people who do accept evolution with no God, which went from 9% to 19%. Nearly a fifth of the United States accepts evolution without God. That's great. I mean, I think that's really a fantastic growth of secularism and science and reason in our country. So there's a lot to be really bummed out about right now in terms of who runs our country and the politics of it and everything. But there's a lot of things that are changing for the better. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that atheism and sort of non-religion or I don't know or none, not having religion at all or not believing in organized religion is becoming more and more commonplace and more accepted in the culture. And this podcast and a lot of the great podcasts and content out there that over the last 10, 15 years with sort of the new atheist movement and so forth has really done a lot, I think, to educate people about the value of science and the value of understanding evolution. Somebody who is a liberal arts person like myself, I'm a cheerleader for science. I sort of wave the pom-poms, if you will. I'm not the quarterback or the coach. But I do love science, and I love the scientific method, and I love evaluating evidence and coming to our conclusions through the use of reason and the use of evidence. And that is becoming more and more accepted in the culture. And I think that's a great thing. And I think that we're moving in the right direction. We're moving in the direction we want to go into. So this is great news. I mean, I think this is really great news. 57% of Americans accept the scientific consensus. 19% accept the consensus without a God. That's fucking great. That's huge growth over the last 10 years. And I think it's only going to get more. I think it's going to just grow. I think it's going to get even more. And hopefully we'll get to a place where we're like our European allies, where the position of evolution is much higher and the position of creationism is at all-time lows. So let's hope that that's the case. So that's it for the news items. Let's move on to Theocracy Watch. Our first story tonight in Theocracy Watch comes to us from CNN. Attorney General Jeff Sessions reveals in closed-door speech new protections for religious liberty are on the way. Quoting from the article now. At a closed-door event Tuesday evening, Attorney General Jeff Sessions revealed that new federal guidance to protect religious liberty is on the way soon. Tuesday's speech to the Alliance Defending Freedom was not open to the press, and the Justice Department declined requests to provide Sessions' prepared remarks to the media, but later published the speech on The Federalist last Thursday. President Donald Trump signed an executive order in May entitled Promoting Free Speech and Religious Liberty, which directed Sessions to issue guidance interpreting religious liberty protections in federal law. But nothing, at least publicly, has come of the executive order today. The department is finalizing this guidance and I will soon issue it, Sessions said, according to the prepared remarks. Sessions also took a swipe at the Inside the Beltway crowd, who he said, quote, has no idea how much good is being done in this country every day by our faith communities, adding that, quote, the value of religion is totally missed by many today. So Alliance Defending Freedom is currently involved in a high-profile case that we heard by the Supreme Court representing a Colorado baker who refused to make a wedding cake for a same-sex couple, claiming that to do so would violate his right to religious liberty under the Constitution. So if you listen to my interview with Eastern Iowa Atheists Director Justin Scott, I kind of talked about the Colorado baker case. The main point that I said is that it's been established law for over a century that the United States, in terms of how we view civil rights, has a standard issue of what's called, or standard practice of what's called, public accommodation. And so generally it's been the case that consumers have more individual freedom and choice than, say, producers. That a business cannot discriminate against someone simply by virtue of their skin color or their sexual orientation or their gender. So that's generally been the accepted case in the United States for the last 100 years. The problem with that is that there's been a real shift in the Supreme Court over the last probably 30, 40 years, where during the first half of the 20th century, there was a very strong emphasis on the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment, which is, Congress shall make no law with respect to establishment of a religion or prohibit the free exercise thereof. So the first half of that is the Establishment Clause, right? The second half of that is the Free Exercise Clause. There's been more of an emphasis over the last probably 2 or 3 decades on the Free Exercise Clause of religion, particularly after the Religious Freedom Restoration Act was passed in the early 90s. Because of that, the court has shifted its general conception of religious liberty, which becomes much broader, and in my opinion, sometimes verges on Christian privilege. It sounds here like Attorney General Sessions is following President Trump's advice in that he wants to sort of upend some of the traditional barriers between church and state, particularly the Johnson Amendment, which does not allow preachers or other religious nonprofit leaders or nonprofits in general to politic for specific candidates from the pulpit. It also really flies in the face of some of the standard practices that have been in the law for the last 40, 50 years. So we've seen this erosion of the First Amendment, particularly in relation to the Establishment Clause, within the last 4 or 5 years. You've seen the Hobby Lobby decision, which was in 2014. Then the Trinity Lutheran case, which happened this year, which I talked about on an earlier episode of the podcast, and now this case in front of the Supreme Court. Will the Supreme Court side with the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment, or will they side with the Free Exercise Clause of the First Amendment? My thinking is probably going to be the latter, and I think that's going to be a huge problem because it's going to upend a century's worth of standard legal practice in this country in relation to places of public accommodation. So Sessions is a religious fundamentalist. He's a theocrat. I don't know what Trump's religious beliefs are. I take him at his word. I think people calling him an atheist is an insult to atheists, so I wouldn't claim him. But he certainly is courting evangelicals, and which is why they came out to him in droves. And speaking of courting evangelicals, let's move on to this other story by the Huffington Post. This story is fascinating. So, evangelical leaders lay hands on Donald Trump in group prayer. I'm going to be quoting the article now. President Donald Trump met with Christian leaders in the Oval Office on Monday for a prayer gathering. This is last Monday. A photo of the meeting, which was shared widely on social media after several of the attendees posted it online, showed the faith leaders laying their hands on the president in prayer. Vice President Mike Pence is also shown in the photo with his head bowed and his eyes closed. Quote, such an honor to pray within the Oval Office for @POTUS and @VP, wrote Johnny Moore, a former senior vice president at the Evangelical Liberty University in a Twitter post. And so there were a couple other pictures of him with the evangelical leaders. That looks like Michelle Bachmann, but I'm not sure if it is. All I know is that the picture of the people praying over Trump with his fucking awful looking hair is one of the creepiest things I've ever seen in my life. It's terrifying. If you want to see what Christian theocracy looks like, it looks like this. It's absolutely terrifying. It's really, really sad. But I'll tell you what, Trump is one shameless opportunist. He has certainly taken advantage of the evangelicals and in some respects has given them what they want. And you know, the Sessions article I just mentioned is exactly that. You know, the Justice Department is on the side of the evangelicals, and so is the White House. And that's a scary, scary notion for First Amendment issues. But that's what elections are for, folks. So in 2018, come out and we can change this stuff. I'm going to move on to our final story in Theocracy Watch tonight. It comes to us from BBC News. Pakistan's secret atheists. I'm going to quote the article now. Being an atheist in Pakistan can be life-threatening, but behind closed doors, non-believers are getting together to support one another. How do they survive in a nation where blasphemy carries a death sentence? Omar, named after one of Islam's most revered caliphs, has rejected the faith of his forefathers. He's one of the founding members of an online group, a meeting point for the atheists of Pakistan. But even there, he must stay on his guard. Members use fake identities. You have to be careful who you are befriending, he says. One man contacted Omar to say he had visited his Facebook profile and printed out pictures of him with his family. You cannot be safe, Omar says. Under a recently passed cybercrime law, it is now illegal to post content online, even in a private forum, that could be deemed blasphemous. And this is in relationship to an article we mentioned back in June about Taimur Raza being sentenced to death for posting blasphemous content on Facebook. Now, Raza wasn't even an atheist. He was a Muslim, but nonetheless, he was pretty much imprisoned and is going to be facing death for criticizing the Prophet Muhammad on Facebook. So I'm going to be quoting now from a Pakistani atheist's diary. Quoting from the article now. Zahir is an online activist who uses social media to express atheist ideas and comment on Pakistani politics. Dear Diary, I've been through 4 Twitter accounts in 1 year now. The last one got blocked last night. It doesn't matter how vague my details are or if the pictures I use are generic. It's as if someone is watching me. Every time this happens, I feel that I should just give up. They want to silence me. So this is crazy to me. I mean, it's wild what has happened to these Pakistani atheists and, other Muslims. Apparently, according to the article, 6 activists have been abducted after posting on forums that are pro-atheist and anti-government. One of those activists spoke to the BBC but does not want to be identified. He believes that Pakistan's intelligence service wants to stamp out not only criticism of Islam, but also criticism of the state. I'm going to read another diary entry here. Hamza is a blogger and a founding member of an online atheist forum. Dear Diary, some people have called it an arrest, but it was an abduction. I was held for 28 days. They wouldn't identify themselves, but I'm sure it was the military. There were 8 days of torture and 20 days of healing. My whole body was black. They made me sign a statement that said I regretted what I had done and that I would not engage with political or religious blogging, and that my family could be a target if I spoke to the media. I'm going to quote one more diary piece here. Suhaib recently graduated from the university in Punjab. Dear Diary, this afternoon at university, an acquaintance approached me and said, I want to have a debate with you. I heard you're an atheist. It was an expression of disbelief, as if to ask, how do you function? She wanted to know where I get my morals from. For her, morality comes from religion, and without faith, you can't be expected to have morals. Later that afternoon, I text all my friends, stop telling people I'm an atheist. I don't want to die. I must learn that discretion is a good thing. We often take our liberties here in the West for granted, particularly when it comes to religious matters. One of the beauties of the United States of America is that we had founders like Madison and Jefferson who fervently believed in the separation of church and state and the value of toleration in the classical Enlightenment sense. These were men who understood full well the power that religion could wield over people and harm them in the process. I think of these people as modern-day Thomas Paines or Voltaires or Diderots, trying to be bright lights of enlightenment in a world that so much wants darkness. And I think that it is a testament to them that they're willing to speak out even when they know it could cause them imprisonment or death. These people are the heirs to the Enlightenment, and they're the heirs to a better future. And I think us here in the United States and in the West broadly, I think we need to empower these people more. You know, we often talk all the time about the bigotry that Muslims face in the United States and in Europe, and that's certainly the case, and it's horrible. But very little is often mentioned of the horrible mistreatment and the bigotry and the violence and the sheer bloody authoritarianism that is often inflicted on people who merely criticize Islam or any other religion, or the state for that matter. Authoritarianism only succeeds at the end of a gun and with the power of a boat. It doesn't win with ideas. It doesn't have any. The beauty of these people and what makes them inspiring to me in so many ways is the fact that they're willing to stick their necks out for what they believe and what they believe is harmful, and believe fervently that they should sort of stamp out this horrible intolerance and violence that comes to them from their theocratic overlords. The United States, despite its flaws, is one of the greatest countries on earth. Its ideals are what make us better. It's our ideals that make us flourish. And I think what we should do in our country is to empower those around the world who seek to speak their mind. You know, and here in the West, we talk all the time about hate speech and curtailing this and that and the other at college campuses. And I find it so petty when people who merely criticize a religion can face imprisonment and death in another country. These people in Pakistan are my heroes, and I really wish them the best. And I think that we here in the West need to recognize that their fight is ours. Whether you're religious or not, whether you're a Muslim or not, their fight is ours. They're fighting for a world that's for freedom, and that's for openness, and for criticism of ideas. And they face horrible challenges in merely entertaining the idea that they could criticize things, let alone actually doing it. And, you know, I wish them like I said, I wish them the best, and I hope that we sometime in my lifetime or in a century, maybe we can move on from this and we can all become more tolerant and peaceful and kind to one another. I think the world deserves that. I know these people especially do. So it's a really great story. It's from the BBC. I highly recommend you search it out. That's it for Theocracy Watch. Tonight's special comment is a little longer, and I hope you like it. It's called What we lose and gain from leaving religion. What do we lose when we lose religion? I've been asked to respond to this question by a friend, and to be honest, it's not easily answered. For us atheists, it's obvious to mention all the terrible things we abandoned when leaving religion. The dedication to barbaric texts and practices, the racism, homophobia, and misogyny of its most fundamentalist believers, the superstitions that hinder scientific and moral progress. All of these are good reasons to leave religion on the ash heap of history. Nevertheless, many still yearn for something bigger than us, something to confide in when times are tough. There is still a longing for the transcendent, alongside the need for community that keeps droves within the fold. Atheists are often criticized for our lack of a totalizing vision for humanity. It's just a negative position. You don't believe in anything, we're often told. In this special comment, I hope to dispel this notion and to offer a countervailing yet meaningful way of life to the broadly termed religious. Atheists often fixate on what we don't believe. I'm here to tell you what I and many others do believe. I also hope to show how a secular life plainly replaces much of what people miss when they lose their religion. For starters, atheism is merely a position to the question, do you have a belief in God? For us that say no or any other answer but yes, that makes us atheists. As David Silverman has pointed out, even if you hate the term atheist but don't believe in a God, that still makes you an atheist. However, for many who came out of religion or experienced a modicum of religious life, that's not enough to fulfill something inside them that is experiential and not merely rational. One of the biggest insights I've accrued over the last few months, especially after reading the work of Jonathan Haidt and others, is that religion is more than the sum of its beliefs. Sure, abandoning the supernatural and all its problematic baggage is a great first step in creating a more humane world, but it is not the only thing we must reconsider when we lose religion. As mentioned earlier, countless people stay within religion for its community, the songs, or the emotional connection they have with their church. Religion is a system of life, not a mere reflection of it. In the case of Christianity, it is a religious tradition with over 2,000 years of traditions, beliefs, and cultural contextualization. When someone spends their entire life committed to a system that totalizing, it is often jarring when they leave. I have spoken to and read of former believers that felt an intense sadness when they lost their faith. It was as if a part of them died when they left it behind. I don't know what that feels like. I grew up in a non-religious home with largely non-religious parents, not necessarily because they were atheists, but because religion didn't matter to them all that much. I can count on one hand the amount of times I have been to a church for a explicitly religious purpose. I studied the major religions and tried to adopt one I found intellectually satisfying, and when none of them were, I became an atheist. Atheism was exactly the kind of position that suited my life. I was a rationally minded, critical thinker who neither missed nor yearned for religious experiences. My position was always an intellectual one, and not an emotional or experiential one. Because of that, I always discounted these aspects of religion. Now, having read about group psychology and the importance of religion in non-rational terms, I'm starting to understand what we really leave behind when we lose religion. I have never felt God, but I have felt the power of music. I have loved music my entire life. There's something beautifully tribal about the way music makes us move, cry, and ultimately feel a part of something bigger than ourselves. I especially love film music. I love music that is designed to make you feel something. It has always moved me how specific chords or motifs play off of one another to elicit a response from the viewer. I've endlessly believed that a movie is only as good as its soundtrack. I think religion works the same way. The way a church invites you, the hymns move you, and the sermons encourage you. It's just like music. This is some of what we lose when we lose religion. The numinous and transcending experiences aren't easily replaced by a commitment to reason and critical thinking. While those attributes are essential for living a successful and fulfilling life, there's so much more we have to account for. As such, I think that secular humanism fills this void. Secular humanism is a philosophical tradition as old as religion, with elements tracing back to antiquity. In essence, it comes down to three component parts: reason as the means of knowledge, ethics as the way to live among others, and experience as the goal of life. In secular humanism, one leaves behind the superstitious and mystical, and embraces the reasonable and evidential. When this component of religion is lost, the possibilities of human achievement and flourishing are boundless. They are no longer shackled by the dogmas of the past. As for humanity's relationship to each other, morality is firmly rooted in philosophical investigations, ethics, and a growing understanding of our nature, biology, psychology. The interplay of nature and nurture provides us with the framework by which we advance our individual and societal interests. It will not be easy, but has not been made easier by religion's near stranglehold on this conversation. For many, the only way to be moral is through religion. Secular humanism, by contrast, provides a reasonable and palatable alternative to religion as the sole arbiter of ethics. Finally, the experience of life, from the numinous to the communal, thrives in a secular humanist framework. A sense of achievement, fellowship, and transcendence exists within the real world. There's no need to rely on religion. The arts, nature, and social interaction become more fulfilling when left to open exploration. Yes, humanists generally reject the afterlife and accept the finitude of our lives, but that encourages them to live well and to treat others equally well. As the humanist philosopher Corliss Lamont once wrote, humanism encourages men to face life buoyantly and bravely, relying upon their own freedom and reason to fashion a noble destiny and a future that is open. In short, atheism is only the beginning of a person's journey when they lose their religion. There's countless philosophies and viewpoints to consider when one leaves their faith. However, this shouldn't be a lament, but rather a celebration of one's capacity for achievement and fulfillment in this life, the only one we are guaranteed to have. There is so much to gain when one places religion to the wayside. We can build better families, better communities, and better societies. We can dedicate ourselves to improving the lives of others through scientific discovery, intellectual achievements, and interpersonal connections. We can develop an ethics that views individual rights, not collective irrational whims, as the pinnacle of political organization. And this can all be done while we enjoy great art and contemplate the meaning of our lives and our place within the cosmos. While we lose a great deal when losing religion, we gain so much more in freedom, truth, beauty, and wisdom. As Penn Jillette said, "For someone who loves freedom and loves people, I don't think we should hope for God at all." That's it for this week of Reason Revolution. Please subscribe to us on SoundCloud, iTunes, and YouTube. If there's a platform you listen to podcasts on that I'm not on, please let me know and I'll try to make it happen. Send us your feedback at reasonrevolutionpodcast@gmail.com. You can follow me on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube at The Daily Clark. Until next week, this has been Justin Clark, and this has been Reason Revolution.